Tyler
knows
everything.
Hello, friends. I'd like to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. I'm Tyler, host of the Tyler Knows Everything podcast, where the nose is crossed out because I always want to learn more. And today I'd like to share with you the history of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving Day is a national holiday in the United States, and Thanksgiving 2019 occurs on Thursday, November 28th. In 1621, the Plymouth colonists and Wampanoag Indians shared an autumn harvest feast that is acknowledged today as one of the first Thanksgiving celebrations in the colonies. For more than 2 centuries, days of Thanksgiving were celebrated by individual colonies and states. It wasn't until 1863, in the midst of the Civil War, that President Abraham Lincoln proclaimed a National Thanksgiving Day to be held each November, and it's always the 4th Thursday of November. Thanksgiving at Plymouth. In September 1620, a small ship called the Mayflower left Plymouth, England, carrying 102 passengers, an assortment of religious separatists seeking new homes where they could freely practice their faith, and other individuals lured by the promise of prosperity and land ownership in the New World. After a treacherous and uncomfortable crossing that lasted 66 days, they dropped anchor near the tip of Cape Cod, far north of their intended destination at the mouth of the Hudson River. 1 month later, the Mayflower crossed Massachusetts Bay, where the Pilgrims, as they are now commonly known, began the work of establishing a village at Plymouth. Did you know that lobster and seal and swans were on the Pilgrims menu? I could see the lobster because they're pretty close to, Boston and Maine. But when's the last time you ate a swan? I think the only thing I call is the swan's man that delivers the ice cream in the truck. Throughout that first brutal winter, most of the colonists remained on board the ship, where they suffered from exposure, scurvy, and outbreaks of contagious disease. Only half of the Mayflower's original passengers and crew lived to see their first New England spring. In March, the remaining settlers moved ashore, where they received an astonishing visit from the Abenaki Indian who greeted them in English. Several days later, he returned with another Native American, Squanto, a member of the Paxituit tribe who had been kidnapped by an English sea captain and sold into slavery before escaping to London and returning to his homeland on an exploratory expedition. Squanto taught the Pilgrims, weakened by malnutrition and illness, how to cultivate corn, extract sap from maple trees, catch fish in the rivers, and avoid poisonous plants. He also helped the settlers forge an alliance with the Wampanoag, a local tribe, which would endure more than 50 years and tragically remains one of the sole examples of harmony between European colonists and Native Americans. In November 1621, after the Pilgrims' first corn harvest proved successful, Governor William Bradford organized a celebratory feast and invited a group of the fledgling colony's Native American allies, including the Wampanoag chief Massasoit, now remembered as Americans' first Thanksgiving, although the Pilgrims themselves may not have used that term at the time. The festival lasted for 3 days. While no record exists of the first Thanksgiving's exact menu, much of what we know about what happened at the first Thanksgiving comes from Pilgrim Chronicle Edward Winslow, who wrote, and this is a little bit of the King James version, so bear with me. Our harvest be gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, that so we might after special manner rejoice together. After we had gathered the fruits of our labors, they 4 in one day killed as much fowl as with little help beside served the company almost a week, at which time amongst other recreations we exercised our arms, many of the Indians coming amongst us, and amongst the rest of their greatest king, Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted. And they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed upon our governor. And upon the captain and others, and although it was not always so plentiful as was this time with us, yet by the goodness of God, we are so far from want that we often wish you partakers of our plenty. I wonder if they had an election back then for William Bradford to be governor, or was he just like, hey, I was the first guy here, so I'm your governor. Historians have suggested that many of the dishes were likely prepared using traditional Native American spices and cooking methods. Because the Pilgrims had no oven and the Mayflower sugar supply had dwindled by the fall of 1621, the meal did not feature pies, cakes, or other desserts, which have become the hallmark of many contemporary celebrations. So I guess they were basically eating a ketogenic diet back then, no desserts. Thanksgiving becomes a national holiday. Pilgrims held their second Thanksgiving celebration in 1623 to mark the end of a long drought that had threatened the year's harvest and prompted Governor Bradford to call for a religious fast. Days of fasting and Thanksgiving on an annual or occasional basis became common practice in other New England settlements as well. So if you run out of food, you basically call for intermittent fasting for health reasons, kind of like we do now. During the American Revolution, the Continental Congress designated one or more days of Thanksgiving a year, and in 1789, George Washington issued the first Thanksgiving Proclamation by the national government of the United States. In it, he called for Americans to express their gratitude for a happy conclusion to the country's war of independence and successful ratification of the U.S. Constitution. His successors, John Adams and James Madison, also designated days of thanks during their presidencies. In 1817, New York became the first of several states to officially adopt an annual Thanksgiving holiday. Each celebrated it on a different day, however, and the American South remained largely unfamiliar with the tradition. In 1827, the noted magazine editor and prolific writer Sarah Josepha Hale, author, among countless other things, of the nursery rhyme Mary Had a Little Lamb, launched a campaign to establish Thanksgiving as a national holiday. For 36 years, she published numerous editorials and sent across letters to governors, senators, presidents, and other politicians, earning her the nickname the Mother of Thanksgiving. Abraham Lincoln finally heeded her request in 1863 at the height of the Civil War in a proclamation encouraging all Americans to ask God to commend to his tender care all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife, and to heal the wounds of the nation. He scheduled Thanksgiving for the final Thursday in November, and it was celebrated on that day every year until 1939, when Franklin D. Roosevelt moved the holiday up a week in an attempt to spur retail sales during the Great Depression. Roosevelt's plan, known divisively as Franksgiving, was met with passionate opposition, and in 1941, the president reluctantly signed a bill marking Thanksgiving the fourth Thursday in November. Thanksgiving traditions. In many American households, the Thanksgiving celebration has lost much of its original religious significance. Instead, it now centers on cooking and sharing a bountiful meal with family and friends. Turkey, a Thanksgiving staple, so ubiquitous it has become all but synonymous with the holiday, may or may not have been on offer when the Pilgrims hosted the inaugural feast in 1621. Today, however, nearly 90% of Americans eat the bird, whether roasted, baked, deep fried, all on Thanksgiving. According to the National Turkey Federation, other traditional foods include stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. Volunteering is a common Thanksgiving Day activity, and communities often hold food drives and host free dinners for the less fortunate. Parades have also become an integral part of the holiday in cities and towns across the United States. Presented by Macy's department stores since 1924, New York City's Thanksgiving Day Parade is the largest and most famous, attracting some 2 to 3 million spectators along its 2.5-mile route and drawing an enormous television audience. It typically features marching bands, performers, elaborate floats, conveying various celebrities in giant balloons shaped like cartoon characters. Beginning in the mid-20th century, and perhaps even earlier, the President of the United States had pardoned 1 or 2 Thanksgiving turkeys each year, sparing the birds from slaughter and sending them to a farm for retirement. A number of United States governors also performed the annual turkey pardoning ritual. Thanksgiving controversies. For some scholars, the jury is still out on whether the feast at Plymouth really constituted the first Thanksgiving in the United States. Indeed, historians have recorded other ceremonies of thanks among European settlers in North America that predate the Pilgrims celebration. In 1565, for instance, the Spanish explorer Pedro Menendez de Avila invited members from the local Timucua tribe to a dinner in St. Augustine, Florida. After holding a mass to thank God for his crew's safe arrival, on December 4th, 1619, when 38 British settlers reached a site known as Berkeley Hundred on the banks of Virginia's James River, they read a proclamation designating the date as a day of thanksgiving to Almighty God. Some Native Americans and others take issue with how the Thanksgiving story is presented to the American public, and especially to school children. In their view, the traditional Native paints a deceptively sunny portrait of the relations between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag people, masking the long and bloody history of conflict between Native Americans and European settlers that resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands. Since 1970, protesters have gathered on the day designated as Thanksgiving at the top of Coles Hill, which overlooks Plymouth Rock, to commemorate a national day of mourning. Similar events are held in other parts of this country. So now you can stay woke. Thanksgiving's ancient origins. Although the American concept of Thanksgiving developed in the colonies of New England, its roots can be traced back to the other side of the Atlantic. Both the separatists who came over on the Mayflower and the Puritans who arrived soon after brought with them a tradition of providential holidays, days of fasting during difficult or pivotal moments, and days of feasting and celebration to thank God in times of plenty. As an annual celebration of the harvest and its bounty, moreover, Thanksgiving falls under a category of festivals that spans cultures, continents, and millennia. In ancient times, the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans feasted and paid tribute to their gods after the fall harvest. Thanksgiving also bears resemblance to the ancient Jewish harvest festival of, Sukkot? S-U-K-K-O-T? Finally, historians have noted that Native Americans had a rich tradition of commemorating the fall harvest with feasting and merrymaking long before the Europeans set foot on their shores. This story was brought to you by History.com, which is the official website of the History Channel. If you're interested in reading more about the history of Thanksgiving, check out History.com and some of their other shows. Once again, I want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving from myself, Tyler, host of the Tyler Knows Everything podcast, where the nose is crossed out because I always want to learn more. Have a happy Thanksgiving.